they would sit down and they would do the thing called the word game. And the point of the word game is that it would drop the logic. So when you're dealing with the acting, you wanted to have no logic. You didn't need any logic when you're acting. You wanted to have your instincts, you want to have your impulses, you wanted to have your openness, you wanted to have your open community, your openness. You wanted to be open. You want to be able to receive the every single thing, whether it's receiving your imaginary circumstance or whether it be receiving only the individual in front of you, which, by the way, is a bit of a trick that you can do with film camera, because if you can open yourself up and open up your emotional availability in acting, you can be able to really influence the ability of being able to do film, because you can gauge this in yourself. Now, the word game, or what's called it's called the repetition now, and it was initially started in New York with "you have green hair," and the person often wouldn't have green hair. I mean, it was very obvious that the person didn't have green hair. Nobody in the classroom had green hair. So it was a matter of the fact that when that was said to them, they would have a reaction about the fact that they didn't have green hair. So they would repeat, "I have green hair," and they wouldn't have green hair. So their reaction was always somehow unanticipated. Nobody knew how the person would respond. And that was how they started the word game, or that's how they started the repetition in New York City. And as people learned and the processes came, so all the way over, and I'd love to interview more people about this topic, so feel free to contact me about that. But the thing is that I have a lot of experience in many different areas myself, but anyway, this particular topic is fascinating because it was trying to get the actor out of their logic. That was the massive idea. It was trying to get them into their emotions, into their feelings, into their at that point in Sanford Meisner's career, he was just trying to get people real. So they always used to say this thing back in New York, saying, "Get into your gut, get out of your gut. You got to get into your gut, work from your gut." You know, everything about the gut. And they wanted responses to resonate off the gut. And they wanted responses to be able to do that the same way in repetition, which used to be called the word game. So you got your repetition, and you've got the history of all of the different teachers that basically studied with Sandy all the way through, and then all these other variations. Some people would come, and then they ended up starting a teacher's training for Meisner, because there were some people that were upset, including him, about some people that went off and would teach. And they weren't authorized to teach, or they were teaching very different variations, just like the Bruce Lee concept. Is that this happened the same way in martial arts. Arguments over who did Wing Chun one way or another way, or which was the best martial art move to be able to do this or that, which is the same conflict that's still today in acting. Everybody's asking themselves, which is the right concept? Well, it's been no secret with Sanford Meisner. Sanford Meisner has said it over and over and over and over. Whatever works. Whatever works. If you want to call the repetition or the word game repetition, or the repetition of the word game, go ahead. It doesn't make any difference. What matters is whether or not you have an internal connection to the other person while you're doing it. And if you're doing the repetition that way, it's not just a head game, which everyone used to get upset over, because there were some teachers, and it doesn't matter who, because the principle of this, some people would learn the word game as being two people sitting across from each other without touching. And one would start with a personal comment, right? Well, then there's this whole argument. Well, can there be a personal comment? Then people were like, yes, they have yes, of course. You want to start with a personal comment. You want to start with a superficial comment? You could, but it depends really who you're teaching. I mean, if you're teaching people that can't handle personal comments, then maybe you want to work themselves up, but they probably want to have personal comments. If you go too deep too quickly with the classroom, it's going to be a little bit interesting. You'd probably be able to work through it, but it might be too intense. So you take the history of how every single person has learned all of these different aspects differently. And you understand that some people learned this as only saying impersonal comments. Some people would sit across, they would say impersonal comments 6 times. And then they'd say, that was it. Well, they saw somebody teach it that way because the teacher was probably rightfully so, teaching what they know and what was helpful to the actors that they were training at the time. Just like with Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee would teach the type of Wing Chun and type of martial art that was good for the students that he was teaching. And that would evolve with the classrooms that he was actually teaching in, just like Sanford Meisner. So you take this approach and you understand that the history has evolved from the word game over to the repetition. And see, the thing is that we have to be watchful of in terms of a community is that you want to be able to have personal comments. There's a lot of people that think that the repetition is something that's a line reading exercise. And they might have been taught that, and there still might be a small value in that, but it's not fluidity. Now, some people were taught that they could have changes, some people were taught that they couldn't have changes. Well, of course, if you're capable of having the nonchalance of acting, you want to be able to have changes. Now, a change in repetition is a justified change. It's not because you're just making it up. So, the big distinction over the years is that you've got this meter that keeps going back and forth between fake repetition versus real repetition, where you want to be able to have genuine contact. Well, if the two students are just very maybe superficial people in their own right, and they don't have a lot of experience with emotions, deep emotions that everybody wants to be able to have in Meisner or other acting preparations, then you can understand that it's easier to start out at a pace that's more fitting to those students, because those students maybe they're not ready to get in a 250 mile per hour Ferrari on their first ride in a car. It's just a little bit difficult. I mean, they might really like it. You just don't know. But they might not. And you want to be able to warm them up to the process. So when Sanford Meisner went out to Los Angeles, there were 3 main places that he taught in San Fernando Valley, of which he had conflicts with most, in some way or another. And in some way, there was a lot of conflict in him trying to, it wasn't that he was in conflict with the people as much as he was fighting to be able to earn the humanity in the technique. And this was the hard work of the actor, of the teacher, working to be able to earn the more and more approaches to be able to mine humanity. And a lot of people came from various different places, and they came over to well, a lot of places, but basically over to Los Angeles or California. And they would come in and they would be repeating only 6 times. They would have it only in a way that was the very, very, very beginning. And it wasn't fluid and it didn't have changes. So people didn't know what to do. I mean, they knew what to do, but they thought that that was the entire process of repetition. Well, look, repetition, or the word game, changed to repetition because in part it was being used in exercises, it was being used in all sorts of work in acting. You could use repetition to be able to mine emotion for certain lines. It's not done that often, but it can. It can definitely work. You could do repetition just prior to a scene to get the emotional continuity right. And then you graduate, usually people graduate themselves into working with the emotional preparation, which is something that I've written a book on. And the website Emotional Preparation. Because the thing is that it's so important because you can work with these things with repetition and with the word game. But the important thing is you want to be able to have prolonged periods of times where you're deeply focused. And what was happening is that some of these really good teachers, people that were very genuine people, would be finding all these nuances and feelings and sometimes even hitting on some emotion. And they would be so happy about the fact that they were able to be excited when they're working, and there's this creativity felt during the acting process by their students or while they're working themselves as actors. And all of that's a beautiful thing. It's wonderful. So the ability to be able to work with the way or the process of which you're being taught repetition or the word game, and understand that although it does involve listening, although it does involve repeating, that those are not the only steps that can be included in it, would be a really big benefit to anybody wanting to work with it. So the benefit is, instead of having to worry about the logic, you want to be able to then turn around and you want to be able to just go into the feeling, and then you want to use your feeling to be able to drop down into an emotion. Now, you have your idea. Now, a lot of people initially have the idea of repetition, and they have a pontification challenge with each other when they do repetition. They try and prove that one of them's right and the other one of them is right. And then all they end up doing is standing there shouting at each other. But that's not the work necessarily. It could be a part of the work if it's creatively put together with something, but the idea originally, as well as all the way to the end, was the fact that it was about dropping logic. So even to the people that are working with it in an ideological way, saying that it's just not exactly the right thing, but it's still very it kind of works in its own way. But it's funny. But what would be best to do is to be fluid with it. Many people have said no, they haven't learned Meisner that way. They haven't learned Meisner that way to be able to do repetition freely within exercises. That's not something that they would do. Well, all I can suggest is that people try it. So here's how it works. if you're working on a scene and you want to be, and you're feeling like you're stuck in a certain area, then instead of working on that language in the scene, like say, let's say, whatever, you're going to go build a house tonight, and all of a sudden, or you're going to go build a house, and you're spending too much time building the house at nighttime, and that's the line of the script, and something about that's not genuine or it's not exactly working. Well, you can go in and do repetition, and you can go in and you can mine that, and you can figure it out, or you can go into repetition while you're rehearsing and see if what that does is it sparks some kind of feeling, and then hopefully that feeling will drop into an emotion. And then once you've got that emotion inside of you, then you can go, yep, we've clicked. Now we can go back into the scene. So the evolution of you have green hair is still able to be achieved within a script work. But it's just using, that's part of the reason why it was renamed repetition. Because it was renamed repetition from the word game, because people were getting a little bit heady with the fact that it was the word game, and people were thinking that it was something that they had to be able to make up words to be able to say to another person. Which isn't the point. The point was to actually be able to have realism in acting. So, write in the comments, and as kind as you can, whatever you need to, but the thing is that just understand that there is an ability to be able to do this work in a way where you're personally involved. You're actually in a situation that is actually in a situation that's alive, that the point of the repetition is to be able to keep yourself alive and involved. The more you can keep yourself open to the other person and connected to the other person, even if you don't like what it is that they're necessarily expressing, keep yourself open to them enough so that you can have, you have your responses, and you can definitely the more you're able to open yourself up to the other person, which this exercise of repetition / the word game is very good at. Because you're able to keep yourself open and practice that acting muscle of keeping yourself open to the other person. Now, some people glibly just say that that's listening, and they already know how to listen, but they barely know how to hear anybody. So, work with every single thing that you have. Work to include repeating as a tool to be able to mine spontaneity. And then you're going to end up in a way that's actually going to be able to give results to your acting. So enjoy the results of your acting, and let me know how it works out.